weird major earthquake. Australia struck by magnitude 6.6 major quake in beach resort, holiday resort on the northwest side of the coast, and has had swarms all around Australia's coast. 6.6 magnitude struck today, July 14. This was the same day, basically, as we had the Philippine earthquake, the Japan earthquake, the Indonesia 7.3 earthquake, and the 6.6 in Australia. Alice Garci, Express UK reports this massive 6.6 magnitude earthquake on the west coast of Australia, the beach resort of Broome on Sunday. It's a beautiful place if you look at Google Earth. Beautiful. It's like a peninsula. The United States Geological Survey said in what is believed to be the strongest tremor to ever hit the state, 6.6 magnitude. One of the Northwest Australia's most beautiful, famous beach resorts has been shaken by this massive earthquake at 2:39 p.m. local time, 6.6 magnitude. Local seismologists believe this earthquake has been the strongest to ever hit this area. One person said on Facebook that the intensive care ward at St. Charles Gairdner Hospital shook for half a minute, 30 seconds. Local paper, the West Australian, wrote, half a minute. That's just about as long as the 7.1 quake of Ridgecrest. Now, tremors were felt from Broome all the way to Esperance in the southwest and Darwin in the north, and it sparked fears along the Australian coast. At 2 p.m. local time, Australian government's website had already received more than 800 reports from people saying that they felt the earthquake, 500 of which came from the northwest coast. More than 200 reports came from Broome, another 251 were registered in Port Hedland. This earthquake hit 203 kilometers, that's pretty far in, 126 miles down, west of Broome at a depth of 33 kilometers, 21 miles depth, the USGS said. 21 miles depth. There were no immediate reports of major damage or casualties. This is a pretty sparsely populated area anyway, but pictures on social media show the ceiling of a store partially destroyed and items, of course, fallen from the shelves. It reminds us of the 6.4 that we had in Ridgecrest. The first aftershock hit Western Australia at 8:26, that's 3:26 p.m. local time, and that was a magnitude of 4.9. That's an aftershock. More aftershocks, of course, are to be expected. Phil Cummings, geologist at government's Geoscience Australia, warned. He also said that it was difficult for geologists to say how many or when they may hit. But it's likely they would decrease in size and happen further apart as time passes, he added. That's if, of course, that was the main shock. If it was not the main shock, then it's a foreshock. We have to remain vigilant to see what happens. After the fact, we'll be able to tell if it was a foreshock or the main shock of the sequence. Derby resident Jody Gaunt was having a beer with a friend when they felt the first quake, and she said, "We were sitting outside and our chairs were rocking. The trees stopped moving and the breeze stopped blowing. We were thinking, is this real or not real? We've never had an earthquake up here or a tremor." You know, that's because of the fact that Australia sits inside the Australian plate, and it's on the outside of the Australian plate, which is pretty big, that you have the earthquakes. One of those areas is, for example, southeast is New Zealand. It's right on the coast of the Australian plate, on the tectonic plate. So it's very unusual to have so many earthquakes right on the coast of Australia, as you can see from the map here. It's amazing. The picture of the crack is from 1895, if I remember correctly. picture of the crack is from, oh, this says here 1968, but when I saw another picture, it was much older, 1895 or something. Now, if you look at the map of the earthquakes, in the Northern Territory you had a swarm of 38 quakes. Western you had 19 and 190 in Broome, 343 southwest of that, 17 inland, 3 and 3 and 5, 63 and 11 down southwest, 4 and 2. And then you had Brisbane, you had 2, and you had Melbourne just north of Melbourne, between Melbourne and Sydney, 2. So it's the west coast of Australia that is really rocking with earthquakes. 343 and 190. So that's 250, 200, 300, 600. That's about 700 earthquakes on the west coast. I don't know what the time span is, but let's say a week or 10 days. That's pretty shocking. Now, breeze, I don't know, maybe that was their idea. She said, I was outside, just saw cars moving. It was a bit scary. You could see them moving. A few things fell off the walls onto the floors. It just went on for a few seconds, and despite the earthquake happening near the coast, the Joint Australian Tsunami Warning Centre said there was no risk of a tsunami. Now, these earthquake eclipses and the devastating magnitude which hit Meckering in Western Australia back in 1968. I guess that's the crack that they want to show, of 1968. Now, the update on this, the last 2 hours, what's going on here, because as we said, they had about 700 quakes, and there's been more earthquakes in central, north, and southwest, and huge quakes again at the Broome area. Now, the more strong earthquakes have struck off Western Australia's north coast, and the experts say the aftershocks could continue for a long time, because it was basically a major quake. Multiple undersea earthquakes also were recorded off the coast between Port Hedland and Broome, undersea quakes. The strongest were magnitude 5.1 and 5.5, and as you see, they're pretty much on the big side. A magnitude 6.6 quake struck in the same area Sunday afternoon, felt from Perth to Darwin. It was the largest, biggest earthquake ever recorded in Australia, matching the quake in Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory in 1988. Now, Geoscience Australia seismologist Spiro Spiliopoulos, who's Greek obviously by his name, said that more than 30 quakes had been recorded in the area in less than 24 hours, and more were expected. The geologist said that there is no threat of a tsunami. The quakes could be related to mapped fault lines in the area, said Mr. Spiliopoulos. And it's not unusual that the Tennant Creek aftershocks went on for a very long time, he said. We got small earthquakes there years after the main shock that took place. They can go on for days and weeks, and the quakes could be related to mapped fault lines in the area. There was only a small chance a larger quake would follow, he said. About 15 earthquakes of magnitude 6.0 and above have been recorded in Australia since the agency began recording data back in 1901, predominantly on the west coast. Spiliopoulos said, we seem to get them roughly every 8 years on average. In 1929 there was a magnitude 6 and above, close to where this one was, the same sort of area off the northwest shelf. And he said that in 1968, the earthquake that devastated Meckering, 130 kilometers east of Perth, registered magnitude 6.5. Curtin University's School of Earth and Planetary Sciences professor Chris Elder said only 6 earthquakes of this magnitude or larger have been recorded in West Australia. The quake on Sunday jolted things off people's shelves in the shops and caused cracks in some buildings, but no major damage has been reported thanks to cyclone-rated construction in the region. So they have to be sturdy to withhold winds and cyclones, and that's what saved a lot of the buildings there. Beachgoers nervously watched the waves to see if perhaps there would be something coming, like a tsunami. The Bureau of Meteorology said there was no risk of tsunami. Derby resident Jody Gaunt was having a beer with her friend, as we said, when she heard experienced the quake of about a minute. Karratha resident Mark McLaren said he felt the impact 835 kilometers to the south of Broome. He said, "We just had my first earthquake on Karratha. We felt it in Karratha. The whole house was vibrating, shaking, and maybe lasted for 10 seconds. My first earthquake, pretty scary," he said. Gaunt, 53 years old, said the quake was the talk of the neighborhood. It was reported that stock had been shaking off the shelves at the local Woolworth store. I don't know if you have Woolworth. Yeah, we have Woolworths in Canada. I don't know if you have it. I don't know if we had it in Ithaca, upstate New York. I think we did anyway. I'm sorry, I'm rambling here. It's just that I can imagine myself sometimes when I'm talking about different locations I have never visited, that they would feel so much like being at home. First of all, the language, and I love the slow Australian brawl anyway, their accent, and finding stores that you're familiar with. It's amazing. Now, he says it felt like being on one of those vibrating machines. It just sort of shook the building. Adding a colleague thought it was a jet from the neighborhood international airport taking off. Okay, well, it wasn't that far. It was not that evident, obviously. The good thing is that there have been no reported injuries from this earthquake, as St. John's ambulance spokeswoman said. It also is understood that there has been no building damage, according to the police spokesman. That's because they built them to withstand cyclones. That's fantastic. So everything's okay. We'll keep an eye out on this as to what's happening in the Ring of Fire in this area of the world, and of course what's happening on the West Coast. And I'll leave links below for you for this. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.